are live. All right. So today I'm going to do a few videos with Cam, who is from, move over here. Cam Wolfe is writing. He also has the Nomad. What was the other one? Shoot. Oh, I'm sorry, Cam. Wolfe the Nomad, the story Nomad. There we go. I was like, I know it's Nomad, something about something like that. Okay, yeah, so you can find him. He's got two different channels. One's more about writing, one's more about reading. But of course, they kind of mix. But I've been watching him for a long time now. I enjoy his content, and definitely check him out and see what you think. So I'm going to go over a few of his videos today. A couple of them I have seen in the past. Some of them I haven't ever seen. I don't think I've ever seen this one right here. And we'll see what we say about it.
Welcome back, writers. What's shaking? My name's Cam. Welcome back to another video. I make videos on this channel talking about my writing journey and all of the writing related stuff along the way. If you are a writer as well, then stick around. I have plenty of videos for you to check out and plenty more to come. Just really quickly as well, I've been saying for a bit now that I will be making my grand return to Twitch soon, and I actually have a date for you. 8 a.m. Central Standard Time, Sunday the 7th of August. That's when my next stream will be, and that's hopefully from that date, I'll be doing it at least weekly. Come along, hang out with some other awesome writers, and have some fun. We play games, have chats, we do writing sprints, which, if you're not familiar with that, it's basically a short period of time where we all stop and do some writing, and then we check back in and see how everyone went. It's basically just like a big online club. It's a lot of fun. It's great. So, today I wanted to chat about something that I've mentioned in quite a few videos, but I've never really gone in depth on it. Show, don't tell. The one writing rule that I'm sure you've had yelled at you probably a million times by every author with an online writing course. And this is something I've always actually been kind of flip-floppy about. Flip-floppy, there has to be a better word for that. I am a writer, I swear. Now, show don't tell in theory makes quite a lot of sense, and for the most part, I do think is very important and good advice. But if there's one thing I've learned over my entire time as a writer, I don't know how long it's been now, but if there's one thing I've learned, it's that no one rule when it comes to this, or pretty much any art form, should be taken as an absolute, with very few rare and obvious exceptions. Basically, when you're writing, rather than telling the reader what's happening or what the room looks like, what the character's feeling or what they're wearing, you show them. For example, instead of the handsome Australian authortuber seethed with rage when he saw the rotisserie chickens were gone, you could say, the veins in Cam's neck bulged as a wave of heat painted his face red. In place of a rotisserie chicken, there was now only empty, hot steel. No. Wait. One of those examples is pretty boring and tells you exactly what is happening. He seethed with rage. But the other example doesn't even mention any words like angry, yet you still get the message. I would say even clearer than the first example. This one is a really easy black and white example of show don't tell doing its job and doing its job well, resulting in a better story. However, there is an issue. Actually, first, I'll make it clear that this is just my personal opinion. In fact, it's my opinion as a reader rather than a writer, but I'm not an educator, so far be it from me to tell you what to do or not. Here's my issue. A lot of authors take this rule to heart, and I'm guessing in the revision stage, they go back and they replace every single tell moment with a long-winded descriptive show moment. And I don't think this is a good practice. Show don't tell is something that, in my opinion, should not be seen as an absolute rule. Sometimes, in fact, I would probably go so far as to even say most of the time, I would rather you just tell me what's happening or how the character is feeling so that we can move the plot along. Descriptive writing can be beautiful in moderation, but when authors go arse over tit with it, we end up with a dump truck worth of purple prose, and that is one of my least favorite things. Again, this is just my personal opinion, but it's one of my least favorite things when I'm reading. What I find is that we end up with as much information in 30 pages as we could have gotten from just 3. This is why I enjoy books from authors like Brandon Sanderson, because he actually does quite a lot of telling rather than showing. But the awesome thing is, when he does do showing over telling, I appreciate it more, and I'm like, wow, that was a really beautiful section of descriptive prose. I don't always get the same feeling when I'm reading from authors that do this with every single sentence, because I just become numb to it.
We talk about in writing this phrase called show don't tell.
Here he
right?
is, the man.
And it's become a mantra. It's this thing, it's like, you know, anytime anything's wrong in a story, people be like, well, you didn't show enough, you told too much. And they're often right. But show versus tell is not something to hold up as like the absolute gold standard, because almost always showing more and pulling down on the pyramid abstraction requires what? More words.
It's kind of like when people say use said instead of any other dialogue tags. Using said allows the reader to kind of skim past it but still understand who said what. They can move on without worrying about the fluff. Ironically, this is another rule that I take a bit of issue with because I actually do like descriptive dialogue tags. Sometimes, "Get out of here before I change my mind," grumbled the old man, is more interesting to me than "Get out of here before I change my mind," the old man said. But again, I do agree that these tags should be used in moderation, kind of like showing rather than telling. Anyway, those are my thoughts on show don't tell as a reader, but what about as a writer?
So I'll say that, and he's going to get into a different viewpoint on, I guess, as a writer. But like, yeah, so when you're reading and you have to read like a half a page worth of showing, that can be pretty brutal sometimes, right? I've mentioned before that you can tell more later on in your novel or in your story. It could be a short story too. You can tell more later on after you've like shown things. So if you've shown a person be angry before, you could just tell the reader that they're angry because now we already know what they look like when they're angry, right? That kind of thing. So if you've already shown it, you can now tell. Don't abuse that. It's one of those things where it's a balancing act, right? You don't want to go too far to where you're always showing. You don't want to do where it's like, oh, I showed once and now every other single time, which is like, chock full of the book, I just tell the reader that they're angry and expect them to remember that one time that I showed them. So there is balance, but yeah, you can get away with telling. Telling is a tool. It's just a tool that you have to use. It's a bit of a finesse tool though, so using it all the time is going to kind of make your book pretty boring.
Well, of course, I do try to make sure that I am showing rather than telling in most cases, especially when writing fantasy, because I want to paint an interesting picture of what's happening with words. However, I do also try to make sure that I'm keeping the story moving and not bogging it down with unnecessary fluff. And unfortunately, sometimes that's what showing instead of telling does. It adds fluff. So sometimes I'll just tell. For example, the soldier whipped around, his expression furious. You know that the soldier just turned around and he's angry. We can move on. It's kind of terrifying every time I do go through and I tell rather than show because...
Yeah, so like I just mentioned in my example of like being angry, right? This one here is like, if it's the soldier, like you don't know who this person is it really important to like describe what their face looks like when they're angry? No, they're probably going to die in like half a page anyway, so it doesn't really matter. Excuse me. So it's one of those things where, again, it's a tool to be used, and that's a perfect case where you can be like, we don't need his detailed expression because he's a nothing character. We need our main character's expression. We need our main character's feelings, maybe the reaction to this soldier whipping around kind of thing. But yeah, that is a perfect example of when you can tell rather than show, because we don't need this random soldier's, face ingrained in our brain. We just need to know that he is upset right now.
I imagine someone reading it and saying to themselves, this isn't showing don't tell, therefore it's bad writing. And I don't even blame them for thinking that. Like I said, this rule has been drilled into us so much that we press on it whether we're reading or writing. And to be very clear,
I would also just amend what I said, or add on to it, I guess, is just that it goes back to what I mentioned before about, if you've shown what a character looks like angry earlier, then later on you could just tell us. The same thing kind of applies to the overall book. You want to have your beginning pretty loaded with telling. Rarely use telling in the beginning of the book. That way, because again, you're building your reader's trust in you, and you're saying, trust me, I know what I'm doing. I know how to tell this story. So, as you're going through the beginning portion, making sure that you are showing when you should be, and telling in the very, very rare few cases. These are very rare cases. Don't make this exception for everything. The very few rare cases should maybe even be considered to not do it in those cases too, in the beginning because you want to build that trust. But if you do it right in the beginning, later on you can say, okay, I'm going to start telling a little bit more to get the pace, a bit snappier. Because in the beginning of books are always going to be slower anyways, and the end of books need to be like rapid fire, need to be coming in hot, right? So going slower in the beginning, using those prose to show, is more important at that point in time, and also much more forgivable by the reader. If the reader is having to read a lot, like they've gone through a whole chapter, a whole 2 chapters, and they're like, it's a little slow right now, they're going to be more okay with that in the beginning, because beginnings typically are a little slower. Once you get to the middle, it's a no-go, right? You don't want them to feel like they're slogging through the middle, or the end, obviously, either.
Clear. If I am doing way too much telling rather than showing, I should be called out for it. Criticism is good. All criticism is valid, even if sometimes, rarely, I find myself disagreeing. My hope would just be that both readers and writers are asking themselves if this line...
I would say that all criticism is valid, but not all criticism is equal.
...that they're picking at needs more descriptive writing. Or maybe it works best as a quick tell so that we can just move on. So one of the things I learned most from reading Stephen King and, following his writing advice stuff, like I read Stephen King's book on writing. Anyway, one of the things I learned most is that unless a character or location in the story is important, I actually won't spend much time at all describing them. The reader simply doesn't always need to know what this random side character or person is wearing, or the color of this random room's walls, unless it's important or sets the mood. For example, in a horror story, saying that the walls were as red as blood could really set the mood. But readers do have a pretty good imagination. They'll fill in the blanks from context alone. If I have a random character who happens to be, let's say, a criminal in a fantasy tavern, the reader can imagine what type of haircut they have or what they might be wearing. You don't really need to tell them. There is a lot that you can do to build the atmosphere in this tavern through descriptive writing, but you don't need to go from top to bottom. Keeping the story moving is incredibly important. So what I usually do, I will give 1 or 2 things that sets the atmosphere, and then I'll move on to what the reader needs to know. That's what works best for me personally, and that's something that I've kind of integrated from all of the different writing advice I've gotten from courses and authors, etc., and from my time as being a reader. Anyway, like I always say, the beauty of writing is that it's an art form, and art form is always subjective. So what do you think about Show Don't Tell? I would love to hear it. And also, are there any other writing rules that we've had drilled into us that you're not really on board with? Stick around for more writing videos. Go follow my Twitch page so you can hang out with us when I go live. And until next time, good luck with the writing, mate. Catch ya.
So when it comes to this, basically, I think that I don't have anything much more to add, other than, when it comes to this, it's like a lot of the other rules where it's like you follow it or you break it in service of the plot. Does it move your plot forward? Does describing this side character that's not going to be in the book for the rest of that's not going to be in the book at all after this, is it really important to know what they're wearing? Is it really important to know all these details about them? No. So just giving like generalizations, he was in a fine coat kind of thing, right? Okay, so we get the idea that his coat is kind of a fine make. It's a little bit more pricey. Therefore, this guy probably has a little bit of money to throw around. You give a little bit of clues like that, but not have to go into like how it's embroidered, how it's, what color it is even. Just say it's, he's wearing a fine made coat. Those kind of things are easy. You want to give the reader enough to imagine things that, like, especially with room description, you want to make sure that you're describing the room so that the person can kind of get an idea of what's around them. And then you want to point out the things that matter to the scene, right? And I had a video about this where I've described a room, and then I ended up cutting a few things. So I was like, I was describing the furniture, and part of the furniture they sat down on, another part of the furniture they end up destroying. So there were some things that I described that were more particular, but then there was this desk that I described that was just kind of like, I just kind of imagined that this room would have a writing desk, and it would be next to the window because it's nice, you get to look outside. But that desk did nothing, right? The desk didn't have any purpose to it, so that went away, right? So yeah, when you're describing your scene, it is to either set mood or to set up something that's a plot point, that's some sort of, it's going to affect the story in some way. And then same thing with characters, your main characters, we obviously need to describe them because the reader's going to be with them for a long time. But then when you get with side characters who aren't going to be there for a very long time, it's only important to describe them as much as like the plot really needs them to be described. And again, going back to that example of, he was wearing a fine cloak, or, you might say what race he is as far as like human or elf kind of thing, right? I mean, I'm thinking about fantasy here. So you might say that he's an orc or a human or whatever, that kind of thing. But other than that, just gives a very easy, broad description, so that way the reader can just kind of imagine something, and then he's also kind of rich because he has a really nice coat on, and that's it. I love Cam's outro music. It's one of the best. Actually, it might be the best. Oh, this doesn't sound right because I